our thinking on this engagement strategy came from. Is that better? What we've been hearing from people about some of these ideas about how to engage with communities to date, because that's informed what we've drafted as the strategy, which you have on your table there. And then a bit about how you can get involved and where we want to go. So very, very briefly, just to sort of restate, we want to sort of tell you a little bit about this strategy and summarize what we've been hearing about it today. In terms of where it came from, we could probably go back a year to March, where we had this big PNCIMA forum, and we had many, many people in attendance, and a couple of the things that we focused on in that meeting, in that forum, were thoughts around how people can engage, recognizing that one of the things we wanted to do after the forum was develop a strategy that would outline that. So following the forum, we had a series of meetings with different interest groups in different communities to sort of talk about some of this stuff, and that led to, in the fall, a bit of sort of our early thinking about what that plan for engaging with people might look like. How are we going to get governments, First Nations, different interest groups working together in this collaborative planning process? So we wrote a very short document that summarized some of those ideas, and we had a group of people who had expressed some interest in being a part of shaping our thinking on this, provide us with some feedback on that. And then we took that feedback away and sort of made a longer document out of it, which is the draft that you see before you. So we're here to talk about that draft today. So one of the things, sort of the central part of that document that we developed and that was discussed in the fall was this proposal for these different, what we're calling planning structures, which is just a fancy way to say where are people collaborating on different parts of this process. And so there are sort of three boxes there, and I'll just say something very briefly about each of them, and then we'll go into some of them in a bit more detail. So moving from left to right, you've got an Integrated Oceans Advisory Committee, and then in the middle, a planning office, and on the right, what we're calling a governance framework. So the Integrated Oceans Advisory Committee, this is this idea of trying to get everyone around one table to have a discussion about the recommendations that would come out of a management planning process. So you get all your different groups who have some interest in the marine environment having one conversation, sharing interests, finding common ground, identifying where their interests may be different, this kind of thing. In order to support that kind of advisory committee, we also recognize there's a role for some of the technical staff, so people like me, people like the technical team with the HIDA, and others from different federal agencies, as well as we have observers from the provincial government who are part of that body, to sort of do some of the coordination work, like planning meetings, developing work plans, discussing those with an advisory committee like this. So that's what that planning office does, which was the box in the middle of the diagram. And then lastly, we also recognize that there needs to be some sort of direction and oversight that's provided to all of this. And so we have what we're calling a governance framework, where we've got different governments talking to one another. And that was a little bit of what Bruce talked about in his presentation. So there are places where federal governments talk to one another, there are places where federal and provincial governments talk to one another, and there are places where we talk with First Nations in a similar way to provide that direction and oversight to how this moves forward. And so the PNCIMA steering committee that's been mentioned by both Russ and Bruce plays a really key role in that. One of the things they do is provide the direction to the planning office, telling them where to go with how we're planning this process. So from there, this is what we sort of proposed as a basic starting point for what this planning process might look like in the fall. We got some feedback on that. And now what we're doing with this engagement strategy is saying, okay, that advisory committee is one important way to participate in this, but not everybody has the time or the interest in participating on an advisory committee that might be meeting on a regular basis and getting a lot of email and including some travel and all of these kinds of things. So what else can we do to provide opportunities for people to participate in this? How else can people get engaged with this, provide their input, etc.? And so you sort of see this diagram with five sort of, well, some people call them barbells, other people have called it a daisy. Depends on what you see, I guess. But anyway, each one of these is what we're saying is one way that you might engage and provide feedback to this process. So, maybe I'll back up here. So I'll start with the one on the top, the Integrated Oceans Advisory Committee, and I'll shorten it to the IOAC. So this is that ongoing multi-sector, so different interest groups, advisory body. And the intention is that this is something that comes together from the start of the planning process to the end of the planning process and beyond. Because we recognize that as much as we want to develop a plan over the next 2 years, everybody knows that things change through time, right? So as things change through time, we need a place to have discussions with everyone at the table to address those changes, to modify the plan, to adapt, and to ensure that what we do 5 years from now, 10 years from now is still sort of appropriate given the issues that oceans face in this area. The other key points about this, we look at this as a consensus-seeking table, so we want people working towards some common solutions here. And as I said, they're going to be working very closely with the support of the Planning Office on those recommendations for the Integrated Management Plan. The intention is that it has participants from the range of different interest groups that you see there. It's also recognized that we want people from First Nations, from DFO, from the provincial government, from other federal government agencies, who would also be sort of sitting at that table to ensure that the direction and the things they want to do are consistent with where those governance bodies want to go with this planning process.
Sorry, who was it that you wanted to take?
We basically want everyone there. So everybody that you see listed here. And then we're also planning that committee has space at the table for participants from different government agencies, from First Nations, that would be at that table to have that one place where everyone is sharing interests and views. But we also are planning at the moment that those First Nations and government agencies are sitting there in what we're terming an ex officio role. So this group is a place for interest groups to come together and have the dialogue with First Nations and governments so that what they're doing is, and where they want to go, they have a chance to bounce those ideas off of everyone else in the room.
So not being a First Nations person and not being a provincial or federal government employee, where would I fit in that, in the scopes of that wheel?
Well, you on the advisory committee as one of the participants from commercial or recreational user groups or from coastal communities.
So you were making reference to basically to the steering committee.
Well, what we would want to do is, you've got governments and First Nations on the steering committee, so you're bringing them to this committee as well, so there's a place where everyone is sharing their interests together.
Okay, I want to ask one more before you go on. Like when you got membership and size to be balanced and inclusive and efficient, and that's at the IOAC level. What have you got in mind there? Is that like what Russ had, 12 to 15 sort of people on an advisory capacity? Is that the numbers you're looking at as well?
Yeah, well, this is one of the questions we actually have for you. So following my presentation, this is what we're going to be inviting you to give us some feedback and direction on. Because we recognize there's a really challenging balance to be struck here, right? We want to be inclusive. We want to make sure that different interests have an opportunity to participate in this. We also recognize that, just as Russ was saying, we might not be very effective if we've got a cast of thousands sitting around a table trying to build something together. So what does the trade-off between those two things look like? How do we get to a place where we're comfortable that everyone who needs to be a part of that conversation is there, but we don't have so many that we start to sort of lose the ability to move forward as a group? The other key point here, though, is that this isn't the only place to participate. So just because you as an individual aren't a part of this committee, it in no way means that there isn't another opportunity or place for you to be providing and your input and feeding into this, and that's where